Whenever people ask me what motivated me to succeed in business, I always think of this one story. I think like a lot of entrepreneurs, Barbara Corcoran, for example, talks a lot about this. There's a desire to prove people wrong. People in your childhood who doubted you, the girl who wouldn't go out with you. Oh, look at me now, I'm successful. You want to show your parents, hey, you did something, you turned out all right. You want to show the people that you met all along the way who said, you're not going to do it. You want to show them that you're successful. And I can't say that I ever had a teacher who said, oh, you're dumb. There were certainly, moments in my rather introverted childhood that, drove me to say, hey, I want to be something. I want to prove something. And I think, that's what really makes successful entrepreneurs. The challenge is, how do you know when you get to a certain point of success to where you taper that to then go back to saying, hey, I believe in myself. I'm confident in my own abilities. I think a lot of people who are entrepreneurs make it through life, not, keeping working, keeping growing their companies, never giving up, going. People say, oh, the money's never enough. And the reality is the money is enough for them, but they don't feel secure in the money. They feel like maybe their talents, and this applies to me as well, maybe my talents will stop tomorrow, and then maybe I'll squander the money somehow, or maybe it'll be lost, or maybe something will happen. And how do I just keep going? Because I just want to reach that next level of security. But there was a particular moment out of all this kind of negative reinforcement of like, how do I prove people, that really stands out to me. And I think it's something that if you're just starting out, you can apply in your own life, perhaps, to be better than the rest. I got into the radio business. 2004, I guess, was a little more of a growth business. And I would just pick up the phone and call people and say, hey, I have these radio stations that I found that will run your show, and you can basically run it like an infomercial and I'll sell it to you. And so I made connections with people on the radio side, and I made connections with people who bought radio time, and I would call them and match them up. But initially, I wanted to make more contacts, I wanted to learn more, and so I called a local radio station. I forget how I got in touch with these guys, but they were kind of in this infomercial space. And I said, hey, I hear you're transitioning to be a more legitimate station, and your website looks terrible. Can I make you a website? And the first thing I learned was that radio people are some of the cheapest people in the world. I thought afterwards they'd be like, oh, do you want a stipend or expenses or something? They're like, oh, yeah, thanks. And I learned, arrange the deal in advance. But here I am, I'm 19, I make the website. And I just kind of go my own way for a while. And then I think to myself, well, this station, they're trying to be a bit more legitimate. They're trying to bring in some big names. They're trying to do some interesting things. They're spending money on marketing. They want to be more in the community than the station used to be. Maybe I should go talk to those guys and see if I can do something. And so I kind of went over there and I convinced them to give me a job basically at night. I did briefly work in the morning, producing a morning show with Charles Gued, who we interviewed at Nomad Capitalist Live. But most of my time there, I was working at night so that I could make calls and talk to clients and find new radio stations and find new deals during the day. And then I would go in at like 6 o'clock at night and stay till midnight, 1 in the morning, and then go home. And so I said, like, listen, I don't know if I need to be paid. And they said, well, we have to pay you. I was making like $9 an hour, and I was producing these nighttime shows that, in many cases, were either national shows, and I got to kind of learn how national radio shows were done, or they were local shows, people who just, paid. The doctor came in to do a show about, being a doctor. And I so much wanted to talk to everybody, like the people who came in to host a show. I wanted to learn, like, how can I get, more infiltrated in this world of finding clients for my business, and with the goal of taking some of them national and putting them on 10, 20, 50 stations. That, whenever the doctor or the mortgage broker would do their show from 7 to 8 on Monday, they'd come into the control room and I would talk to them. And sometimes, on occasion, I would skip the weather report. You had to read it at 2 minutes after the hour. You'd play the news for 2 minutes, and then you'd play the little weather, and then you had to get on as the producer and say, right now it's 57 degrees. This is Fahrenheit for those of you who aren't in the U.S. The kids who ran the family radio station, they came in during the day. And their father, who had kind of started out in the business, was, kind of an old curmudgeon, but a lovable curmudgeon, who had grown up, driving taxi cabs and bringing himself up from kind of a lower middle class upbringing, worked his way to Columbia, made money in business, and then got into his passion of radio. And he's like, I don't want to deal with the kids. I'm coming in at night. I like working late at night. And that's when I would work. And one night he, saw that I was talking to the host, and I didn't read the temperature. I just played the weather, and then skipped over, and then started playing the commercials. And he came in, this wily, old guy from New York. He said, you didn't read the temperature. I'm tired of you not reading the temperature. If you don't read the temperature, again, I'm going to fire you. And I wanted to learn as an entrepreneur when I started hiring people, like most people don't like being treated that way. I had to learn the hard way once or twice that people They don't respond to this kind of negative reinforcement the way I do. But I took that and said, okay, all right, okay, I'm very sorry. I'll do it. Okay, no problem. And I went into another little studio and I said, okay, in a partially let me be innovative and partially like let me show him kind of entrepreneurial thing, I said, I'm going to record every temperature, again in Fahrenheit, from like -50 to like 150. And I stood there for, whatever couple hours I had to one night, recording, right now in downtown, it's, 43 degrees. Right now it's 47 degrees. And I saved these all as these WAV files to where I could go in every time, to where I could talk to the clients of the radio station, and I can learn stuff. I could kind of, get to know what their motivations were, while just kind of teeing up, okay, play the news, then play the weather, then play this WAV file, and then you go right to the next, and so just click one button, and then you talk to the client. You don't have to kind of stop in the middle. Here's this guy, this old curmudgeon. He said, like, he heard word that, like, that's not really me reading the weather. I think when he started hearing, like, I was on the radio station 24 hours a day, because the other guys who produced shows during the day were also too lazy to read the weather, and they would just play my file. And so 24 hours a day, you would drive around town, and I was telling you what the weather forecast, or what the temperature was. And he's like, oh, that's a great idea. And I ended up becoming, very friendly with him. We would stand outside sometimes in the parking lot until 3 or 4 in the morning, after we were both done working. We would talk about different ideas we had for business and all of his, past stories. And he said, he eventually recommended that I go and work with, one of his kids, and we wanted to have a very successful business together. And then I went out to shortly thereafter, I went out to take what I learned working with him and his son, and started my own business, which became even more successful in the broadcasting space before I finally got out of that when I left the United States for good. It was while I was doing that I realized, I could pick up the phone and call people from anywhere. Now, I couldn't stand in a studio and talk to people and get real world advice. And there is a value to being around other people in the same business and masterminds, going to events, meeting people, whatever. But I realized, if I don't want to live in the United States, why am I living in the United States when all I need is a phone that's connected to the internet? And okay, then what happens to my taxes? So that was kind of the early thought process of Nomad Capitalist. But the story of what motivated me to succeed was somebody telling me, they're going to take something away from me. I said, no, I'll prove you wrong. And I'll prove you wrong and do one better. And I think, what I like about working with folks in other countries on the hiring side is there are places where people are just wired, they're more likely to be wired the same way. Obviously, there are people still in the West and where I'm from, the US, and there aren't people in other certain countries who are wired that way. But I love entrepreneurial countries where people may be forced to be an entrepreneur. There's places in, South Asia and East Asia, parts of Latin America, parts of Eastern Europe perhaps, where people just had to be entrepreneurs and they had to push back in the same way of like, I'm going to show you that I can do it. It's nice to have people who they're like, when presented with a problem, hey, here's the solution. Now again, you can find that anywhere in the world, but culturally speaking, I find that that's becoming less and less in the Western world, and it still exists in many places where, again, there's more of this concept of forced entrepreneurship. I mentioned that in the very early days of Nomad Capitalist 10 years ago, forced entrepreneurship. There aren't enough jobs. People have to go out and figure things out for themselves. That's the way that my mentor was raised. He had to be scrappy. And so I responded with this scrappiness, and he respected that. I think a lot of it is lost in places where the corporate world dominates, and scrappiness means nothing, and everyone's trying to cover their tuchus. It was something that I always think about that was very, very motivating, that I wanted to go above and beyond. Again, kind of in a, okay, I'll show you way. And I got rewarded. And it was the beginning of a successful career that caused me to, in the broadcasting business, work with Fortune 100 company, work with some very big direct marketers, work with some very big organizations, and learn a lot along the way. And was the early thought process for Nomad Capitalist, because I also learned a lot about the kind of people who are frustrated with the United States working in the talk radio business. What are the problems in the country? So I wanted to share that story because I do think that mentality, for the many business owners who come to me and say, nobody in Australia thinks like this, nobody in the US, there are places where you can hire that have that mentality. And I think that it's an ultimate example of go where you're treated best. You want a certain kind of person. You want a certain kind of culture. You want a certain kind of lifestyle. It still exists. Nomad Capitalist helps people find these, whether you're an entrepreneur who wants to find super motivated people, not just in your country, but around the world. We help you do that. We can help you set up proper, corporate structures to legally reduce your taxes. The more you have internationally, the more money you can potentially save. We help people get residence and second citizenship and bank accounts in places where more of this culture exists, where there's a culture of getting things done and efficiency rather than give us socialism and we don't want to pay for it. So if you want to learn more about that, go to nomadcapitalist.com, and I hope that story tells you more about what's motivated me to be here with you.